All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Regional Multicultural Monday webinar series. Today, we have a great presentation. I'm very excited to be here with you guys. We have a great speaker. Today, the presentation is going to be, very from a very cultural standpoint, and we're really looking forward to what we have to offer today. The title of today's webinar is Stigma of PrEP, of HIV and PrEP from the perspective of the African American MSM. And today we have with us David Fairman. Mr. Fairman has a public health degree, master's degree in public health, and is a chief diversity officer. He has been working in public health for the last 10 years. David is part of the Education Prevention Department and works as a professional associate for CAN Community Health, and is also presenting with us in this webinar. My name is Leonardo Aguilar, and I'm a program coordinator for the South Florida AIDS Education and Training Center. We want to have a few housekeeping items that we will cover. We want to let you know that the presentation is being recorded today, and the recording will be available for viewing at the end of the week. We encourage participation during the webinar, so if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box, the chat box, or you can raise your hand to have your mic unmuted. If there's any audio issues, I'll be posting the call-in number in the chat box. The raise hand icon appears next to the Q&A chat box. Please, it's very important for us, your evaluation. So we have an evaluation at the end of the event. We will email it to you alongside with CME and CE credit instructions. Please remember that your feedback is extremely important to us, and evaluations are a first requirement for continued funding. It's important for us to know how this affects, your practice. So not to think so much of the clinical, and at the same time, so incorporate the clinical and the personal reflections that you have with clients and as a provider, and how that can affect HIV care. We really want to hear your stories. That not just the presentation was great, and thank you for presenting that. If you can just really elaborate a little more, that would be extremely appreciated by us. As far as the credits, David, if you can advance the slide for the credit, could be so kind. So this is for the CE, so continuing education credits. That's for nurses, social workers, LCSWs, LMACs, pharmacists. So everybody that is not a medical doctor will have to fill this one. Okay, so this is a link that you will receive. Now, for medical doctors, go to the next one, David, if you can. The next slide to the right. Yes, perfect. So that's a credit adjustment form. So for MDs and DOs would have to fill out, these are the only providers that have to fill this, there's a form, there's an attached form. Everybody else just complete the link that will be provided to you via email. All right, it's very important that you do that so you don't get a confusion and do a double work. So remembering this form, this is attached, it's only for MDs and for DOs. That's it. Everybody else pretty much completes the CE link. All right. So if we have that, and I'll remind that again, and I'll send instructions through the email with that. And CMEs and CEs, all that information will also provide an email for you at the end. And in the email, we'll have a contact information for specific for CEs and CMEs. I'm not the actual person that processes them, so I will include an email in there because there's a processing time and so all that good stuff. So first of all, I want to just thank you for being with us, and I want to go ahead and pass the ball to David. David, you can take over now. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Fairman, and I'm excited to be on this actual webinar with you all today. And I hope that everyone walks away with some insight as it relates to PrEP, as it relates to the African American MSM, okay? The first slide we're looking at, it says, don't want to have anything to do with HIV, so of course they wouldn't want to be on PrEP. The next connotation, oh, that shit, and then intersectionality. These 3 points are often things that African American MSM think about or have to the forefront of their minds, or should I say, of our minds, when walking through the doors of facilities with an interest in PrEP. And our task is to overcome those negative connotations and spin them into new opportunities and educational moments to enhance a clear understanding of how PrEP works, how it can benefit the client, and overall how it can be successful as it relates to their medical journey and protecting their sexual health. I do just want to input a small warning. The content and the elements, some may not be suitable for all audiences, but accordingly, viewer discretion is advised, and a little humor there. Our objectives today basically explain discrepancies from the Black male population regarding health care from its origins to present day, illustrated sexual behaviors in different cultures, and to inform participants on PrEP through the gaze of the Black MSM. When we look at the first objective, explain discrepancies from the Black male population regarding health care from its origins to present day, so much comes to mind in that particular concept. As we see here, research has shown that Black African Americans are more likely to distrust the medical system, that this affects their care and health outcomes. And I'll just go right back to that previous bullet, the first one. The Black male population regarding health care from its origins to present day explain those discrepancies. When we look at this slide, it's a very simple slide, but yet it's very, very meaningful. For African American MSMs, just the initial concept and the legwork that it takes to gather up and muster up the strength to walk into a medical center and request care, it is very, very, very courageous, and it's very humbling. Oftentimes, as Black MSM, we don't have the support system that other cultures may have, where they come together in groups or with friends, and they're ready to start this medical journey knowing they have a support system. A lot of the distrust and the fear or the concerns go further back, even outside of the day of HIV and the day of PrEP options. We have learned of many programs that sort of birthed this, such as the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. There were several grave concerns and components that ultimately lead us to this place where we are today with African American men, specifically MSM, who sleep, who are engaging with other Black MSMs, but yet we're wondering and we're fearful as to what are these programs like for us. Is it really beneficial to us, or is this just another government or federal plight to take us to a space that we are not even educated on? The Tuskegee Project was one that brought several questions to the forefront, and we'll see some of those here on this particular slide. The key points of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The experiment lasted from 1932 to 1972. It took part in rural Alabama. Approximately 600 Black men. None were treated. I'm told they were being treated for bad blood, quote unquote. Given free medical exams, meals, and burial insurance. Did not get consent from participants. This particular slide, I want you to just take a moment when you're in the space and you're engaging with that MSM, men that sleep with men, and I'll open up on that particular definition as well in a moment. I want you to be cognizant of not only this Tuskegee experiment that has placed some negative stigma there, but I also want you to be cognizant of the person that's standing or sitting before you, and to take an opportunity to engage and get to know as much about this person before we even jump into dialogue as to the PrEP conversation. There's a question in queue that states, can you explain what MSM is? And simply put, MSM is nothing more than men that sleep with men. However, when we look into some of the verbiage in the Ryan White definition, it states we look at it as more of a space of contracting the virus in contrast to looking at the whole person. Just because a person is a male that sleeps with men and MSM doesn't necessarily give a direct connection to an HIV virus or an HIV diagnosis. Risk factors are definitely in place, but that's in place with everyone, whether it be heterosexual, MSM, or however the person chooses to identify. And we have to begin to look at individuals in a more holistic approach and understand and give them value outside of what they may be presenting according to the questions that are placed in front of us to even get them into care. Going back to some of the key points, we see none of the men were treated, given free exams and a few things there. All of these particular points are still attributes to concerns that Black MSMs, men that sleep with men, are facing on today. And this particular slide set, the first comic piece there, the reasons for health disparities among Black Americans are complex. But to this day, the Tuskegee experiment influences how many view medicine and public health. When it comes, again, to Black MSM, and specifically Black African Americans in general, trust is a really big component when we look at African Americans engaging with their medical physicians or with any type of medical service. I know we have so much time that we can spend with the client, and I know for a fact that there are key components that we're searching for and that we're digging for as it relates to engaging the client. But I want us to take a minute and just think about how much more we could be effective if we not only get to know the risk factors, but we get to know the person that's seated in front of us. With African American men, it is very, very important that we first develop a trust component. It's very, very important and critical to understanding what their expectation and what their outcomes may be of the particular medical visit, specifically as it relates to PrEP, and we want to make the time to address any questions or concerns that they may have. To the opposite side of this particular set, it shows in 1973, $1.8 billion class action lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Alabama on behalf of the affected men. A year later, the U.S. government awarded the afflicted $10 million in an out-of-court settlement and lifetime health care for those affected. We see that 28 died directly from disease, 100 plus from complications, and then 40 wives infected, 19 children born with congenital syphilis. So when we think about this relationship and the fear factors and the concern as relates to MSMs, African American MSM, and getting into medical care, inquiring about PrEP, we have to understand that there are a lot of factors surrounding that, which causes some concern for the MSM. This particular slide speaks to GRID, which was an epidemic that focused years ago as we looked at HIV, and we'll soon understand how it all marries in. So key points of the AIDS epidemic in relation to Black MSM. The first report of AIDS was in 1981, initially called GRID, was called the gay cancer and the gay plague. By 1996, more cases occurred in Blacks than any other racial population, often have smaller social networks. And I want to take a moment to hone in on those last two. By 1996, more cases occurred in Blacks than any other racial population. We can take this particular statement and apply it even to our current situations when we're engaging with our Black MSMs, our Black clients that walk into our offices. The impact of increasing numbers as it relates to not only HIV illnesses, but just the knowledge base of the MSM population being aware of resources is a concern that we have to help overcome. And we can do this collectively by engaging with our Black MSM population. Let your conversation be open and candid, be transparent. It's one thing for us to have the knowledge base and to know exactly how the program works or how the medicines work, but for that client that's sitting in front of us, they want to know that we actually have their best interests at heart. And when we relay that particular plan of care and we can show the empathy and we're transparent, 9 times out of 10, that client will give you all of the information that you need. They will bring forth all of the questions, all of their concerns in a very open and candid way that will make them feel safe, and it'll make them feel like we actually are the ones that care for them and are going to help them through this particular plan or journey that they are embarking upon. On that last bullet, we show that African American men, MSMs, often have smaller social networks. I can speak to that personally. As an African American MSM, compared to some of my other cohorts and associates, it's very, very awkward because we may have 3,000 friends on Facebook, but in our real life networks, we can count on our hands the number of people that identify and look like myself that will guide us or help us or even have a conversation as it relates to our sexual health. Most recently, we were out at brunch, and I brought up the topic about PrEP because I want to make sure my friends are aware of it, and if it's something they would like to do, to provide them with valuable information and proper education as it relates to the PrEP program. And even in our circle, it seemed very odd and uncomfortable for us to simply talk about protecting ourselves and even minimizing our sexual risk. When we look at other cultures, other races, oftentimes that is not a difficult conversation to have because there isn't so much negative stigma placed to sexual health and understanding the resources that are available. So being a black MSM and having the network to say, hey, we're here for you, that's a reality that some MSM black men do not have. And when they do decide to come into our office spaces, we really, really want to be that person that can be open and honest with them, and that allows that client to have the conversation and bring their concerns to us without judgment. They've already dealt with a lot of lack and flack in their thought process, so when they come into our doors, be the person that can engage with them, that is willing to listen to them, and most importantly, that has the conversation without judgment. And when I speak to it without judgment, we have to be cognizant of our body language, even in our meetings with clients. Oftentimes we're seated, we've been through a lot throughout the day, and we tend to either lean forward on the desk with our head in our hand. Our body language gestures are sometimes confusing to the person that is in front of us. So we want to also always be cognizant of not only the verbal engagement, but we also want to be cognizant of our physical engagement, specifically our body language as we do engage in these conversations with our MSM population. And the reality of life in general is you are either affected or infected with HIV or AIDS. And I know some of us may have heard this particular topic statement before: you are either affected or infected with HIV or AIDS, and that brings different values across the board. Yes, one person can be affected, meaning they are familiar with someone that is living with an HIV diagnosis. When they're affected, they know the person, they provide support in some way to that individual, and we'll speak to the piece of support in just a moment. Or at the end of the day, that very person could be infected with HIV or AIDS, and they're coming to us to learn about PrEP to maybe protect their partner back at home, or the partner that they've just met, and they want to move forward to the next level, and they're trying to understand, how can I be proactive in helping my partner protect himself and ultimately creating a safe space for our relationship. So yes, we want to always be cognizant of this fact that individuals are either affected or infected with HIV or AIDS. And this particular slide I might spend a moment on, and I'm going to ask that you open your hearts and your ears as I dive into this piece. Sexual behaviors. Liberally, most people feel like you should be able to speak freely about sex. We have app hookups, polyamorous relationships, and then on the conservative spin, we have it illustrated where sex is only spoken behind closed doors, no sex before marriage, and then monogamous relationships. And your question may be, well, David, how do these behaviors tie into any of the concerns of a black MSM? And I'm glad you asked that question. For our MSM population, there's a great mixture of both the liberal and the conservative viewpoint. Apps are becoming increasingly popular. They are very available through various apps on our phones, our iPads, whatever technology we may have about that. And we definitely have to be cognizant of those behaviors there and those opportunities to connect. But the biggest challenge for the African American men that sleep with men is to simply be able to speak freely about sex. We, as African American men, are so constricted and bound and filled with judgment or preconceived judgment when it comes to our liberties to freely speak about sex. And for some on the call, you may be like, well, David, why is it that Black African American MSM feel limited in talking about their sexual encounters or just sex in general? A bigger piece of having a conversation about sex for Black men is that we have to identify and sometimes defend the viewpoints that are already out there as it relates to Black men. Not all Black men want to be identified as BBC, and you may be wondering, what is BBC on these social apps? BBC simply stands for Big Black Cock. That's just, to me, it's very degrading, and sometimes it's a falsehood as it relates to Black men. Not all Black men are, erroneously endowed, and that can sometimes cause Black men to simply be quiet as it comes to their sexual health. Oftentimes, we don't have the networks that we can sit down with as friends and have healthy conversations about our sexual health without judgment or ridicule. And we look more so on the conservative side where monogamy, that's a big piece. Everyone wants a monogamous relationship. And in 2019, we are seeing the evolution of relationship, and monogamous relationships are in some way losing its popularity because relationships are transferring and growing into spaces that they were not even in the 1980s. I won't go too far behind that, but we are already seeing the progression of relationships go from monogamous to polyamorous relationships. People are more open to invite others into the relationship, and it's a normalcy. It's no longer the difficult conversation to have. And there's a question that speaks to, from the group, I'm curious about the PNP in the Black MSM community, another sexual behavior. PNP is increasing in the African American MSM community. We are seeing several here at my particular agency. I have found it to be very enlightening when having conversations, and these gentlemen are able to open up about their risk behaviors and how they are engaging. The question, PSP, pain and pleasure, and what's happening in there in that particular component. Traditional sex, I guess, if that's a reality, is almost out of the window. Individuals are opening up to explore their sexual curiosities, and in this we find the coin PNP, party and play. And in party and play, looks like Larcella had that particular question, individuals gather and they consume whatever drug of choice. It could be marijuana, it could be alcohol, it could be poppers, and all of these things are invited into a space where the general community is about to engage in some form of sexual interactions. At one point, the PNP, pleasure and play, was something that we only found to be popular amongst our white counterparts, our white MSM. But today, we're seeing an increase in that as it relates to our African American MSMs. MSMs are exploring their sexuality just as every other race is open to exploring their sexuality as well. In our Folsom Street Fair, there were over 400,000 attendees per year, where BDSM and sadomachoism, public nudity, and 94% of the attendees were white. This is something that we can look at as an educational piece. And if in your spare time, you can go back and look at the Folsom Street Fair and how its relationship and impact to the African American MSM community as well. Sexuality for people of color. This is another slide set that I really want to take some time and talk about. Many of us are on the call because we want to hear about sexuality and people of color. I have about 6 points there where people of color feel it to be shameful, violent, needing permission from our partners, seen as queer, emasculation, and then based on perceptions. And if you would just engage with me on this particular slide set. Barry, I do observe your question. Crystal meth seems like it's becoming more prevalent in Black MSM communities, and that is accurate. I am seeing that to be on the increase, even here in the local small area of Northport, Florida. We're definitely seeing that happen. So when we look at sexuality for people of color, it's shameful. Sexuality in African American households is something that we did not talk about in open forums. For most African Americans, but I'll speak to myself in this component, speaking about sexuality was something I basically held aside to chatter with friends as we rode to the school, or it was something that we talked about while at the park. It was just a conversation that was not welcomed in our households, and it definitely was a conversation that almost all of us struggled with to even have with peers, let alone our family members. Thus, another reason why, especially the MSM African American male population struggles with simply having conversations or figuring out how to engage in their particular sexual acts. Is there a reason you're calling it ministry with men? And that's a great thought. Someone mentioned, I thought MSM meant men who have sex with men, and you're absolutely right. Calling it MSM, men who sleep with men, are they interchangeable? And to some degree, they are interchangeable. Violence as it relates to sexuality for people of color. It's not something that we hear about often, but through engagement, community engagement, there are oftentimes small scenarios where men of color have experienced some type of violence, and then most times when that information is brought to our attention, it can be a shock because we often feel that MSM, Black African American MSM, are not experiencing violence in their relationships or even as it relates to their sexual desires. But that is a reality, unfortunately, for men of color. Needing permission from their partners. And when we say needed permission, we're stating, I'm looking at the component of the sexual role. It's like, what will this look like for us? How will we engage? The whole stigma piece of identifying who's going to be the top, who's going to be the bottom. This is really a conversation that is still difficult as it relates to sexuality for people of color. Being seen as queer, emasculation, and based on perceptions. Based on perceptions is a major, major piece as it relates to sexuality for people of color. When I say those perceptions, there are several of those. For example, is it okay for Black MSMs to date outside of the African American sphere? That is still a conversation that many Blacks are having. And I would think that in today's society, we should all be open and open-minded enough to understand relationship and how we engage that sexuality should be with the person that we feel we want to be with, regardless of race, regardless of financial status. But all of those perceptions and many more are still in place to this day. Emasculation depends, it's deprived from taking away the masculinity of this particular person of color. And in all cases, we don't necessarily have to give up our masculinity to enjoy our sexual privileges. Sex is something that we should enjoy across the board, regardless of the identifying role and regardless of our racial dynamic. No one should ever feel emasculated when it comes to that, and we should not have to deal with perceptions that are already in place. Some could be positive, some could be negative, but this is something that should not take the previous highlight as to how we operate sexually. That is a very biased and difficult situation, and at some point I'm sure we will reach a place where everyone is liberated enough to make these choices as it relates to their sexuality and how they perform regardless of color. And so why aren't Black MSMs prepared, meaning PrEP? Some are scared to get tested. Self-hate that relates to homophobia. the quote-unquote Truvada whore, HIV stigma, lack of education, low income, unemployment, and intersecting disparities. If I can, as an African American MSM, I want to really speak to the education, the lack of education. For African American men that sleep with men, this is really a opportunity for us as providers, as educators in this particular area as it relates to PrEP, to give our community members accurate information and to do so in a very effective way. And when I say that, by doing it in an effective way, sometimes we have to let go of the letters behind our names. That is oftentimes the biggest challenge in communicating and engaging with men that sleep with men, men of color. We want to just be as transparent as we can when having this conversation to educate them on PrEP. It is very ineffective, and I found it to be ineffective if we're speaking in a language that is over that particular client. We want to sit down and engage, hear their thought processes and their questions as it relates to PrEP, and then in a very simple, matter-of-fact way that the client can grasp, present that information to them to help them understand that we're the tools in place to help guide them in making the proper choices for their sexual health. We're not the experts on this. We don't want to create a space where they're uptight, but we want to provide education in an open space and in a way that the client feels comfortable bringing up their questions to us, because anyone can get a person enrolled in PrEP, but our goal is to not only get them enrolled, but we want to absolutely make sure that we are understanding the client's needs, we're understanding any questions that they may have, and most importantly, we're giving that client a space where they can be free, they can ask those questions without feeling judged. And on the other side of that, we look at the HIV stigma. While engaging with clients that come in through our doors, specifically our African American clients, there's still great stigma surrounding HIV. And while we still have the stigma with HIV, we're also seeing stigma as it relates to PrEP. Some African American MSM feel that PrEP is another way to just get HIV into their systems, another way to just wipe out how African Americans can be impactful within our cultures, within our communities. And all of these particular bullets here play a part as to why MSMs aren't prepared. And the bigger piece, which is not here, is allowing Black MSMs to walk into a space where they see someone who looks like them. And I'll say that again. We have to understand the importance of having someone who looks like them be available and open to educate them and offer services about PrEP. There is no better connection than to put them into a space where the individual feels comfortable. We have to create that environment for every single person that sits across the board from us. We must understand the importance of giving a free space that allows the client to understand that, hey, I am here for you, and we may even share some similar life experiences, and that in turn will create a successful plan for the client, and it will almost ensure their willingness to adhere to PrEP as long as they desire to be in that particular program. And so visibility, we all are aware of the social apps that are out there. This particular one, Grindr. Grindr is a great way to utilize social media to get information out about PrEP. And if you would take a minute and just look at this particular slide set, it says, come learn about one of the hottest topics of discussion in the gay community. You've heard about PrEP, but now get the information firsthand. A panel of experts will be there to give you all slides of the story. Tap more to get your free tickets today. And then on the flip side, it says, Captain Rockets and the Action Squad. Captain Rocket and the Action Squad need your help to continue the fight against the spread of HIV. Here are some of the things you can do. Simply getting tested, reduce your risk by using a condom, and talk to your doctor about PrEP or PEP. Social media is a really great tool as it relates to engaging not only the MSM community, but all individuals that are interested in PrEP. And I encourage you to get with your locations, with your medical offices, with your providers to figure out how and if you can incorporate social media into your platforms. The JACT is another website where not only MSM gather, but most men who are having sex with men. And that's another platform where we can utilize and engage and educate those individuals that are actually looking for more information on PrEP, and they can do so without having to come into a medical office. And yes, these ads are on Grindr, and they're also on JACT, and it gives a space where the individual can get first-hand information about our PrEP services without having them walk into the actual brick-and-mortar clinic. As we know, that can be a very difficult and hard decision for some African Americans to make. And again, as you go further into the apps, we see how they become increasingly beneficial to help individuals get the information they need at the touch of a finger. Many times it's really, really difficult to get a client into the office, especially when we're doing outreach events or we're speaking at public forums. It's sort of difficult, but social media puts this platform in front of them, and they can take their time, read through the particular bullets, click on whatever links they need to click on that will provide the information that they are seeking. This gives a wide opportunity to everyone. It's a diverse and inclusive option for every single person to find out how PrEP operates. It's a great tool, and I encourage you guys to try and find that out. And some of our possible solutions: more availability for pickup at drugstores, more specific social media promotion, MSM apps, adjusting the narrative, the language, depressing statistics, better accessibility, more PrEP clinics, and then delivery options. If you would just go with me to adjusting the narrative, the language, depressing statistics. We all have sat down behind our desk or we've attended seminars and we hear the numbers, we see the data, and it can be overwhelming. And I feel, in my opinion, if the language changes to say, and this is just a hypothetical, versus black men are becoming highly impacted with HIV, or black men are not enrolling as quickly with PrEP or medical treatments to prevent HIV transmission, and switch that to say, our challenge today is engaging with the African American MSM community and learning how to bring them into care. This is a great way to make it cohesive and to make it diverse and culturally competent for everyone, so that we're not just focusing alone on the black MSM community, but we're bringing everyone into the conversation. And oftentimes, we create these spaces where we bring individuals to the table, but then we don't give a voice to that. And when we bring individuals in, we want to give voice to everyone, regardless of their race, of their sex. We want to hear from that person. There's a question on the board, a statement rather. You have not mentioned the negative impact of religion on discussing sex and HIV. And I'll speak to that. What are my thoughts? Religion and HIV. I know some of us have contracts, or we have goals in our reporting where we want to engage with the religious organizations in our communities. And that is daunting in the African American community. And if I have the liberty to speak to that as an African American MSM, it's very difficult. Oftentimes, the church is pretty much, it should be a place of safety, a place of community. And what I'm finding is that the black church specifically is no longer that space for black MSM, for the black LGBTQ umbrella. It's no longer that space. We make arrangements with these pastors, and they already know that, who we work with and what our mission is, and yet we get to the table and they shut us down because they don't want to hear about HIV. They don't want to hear about PrEP, and most importantly, they do not want to talk about sex. This issue is a great, great barrier as it relates to preparing our African American community and all communities in that regard as it relates to education moments. Education is often missed through the black church, which is sad because many of us gather in local churches on a Sunday and sometimes throughout the week, and they talk about everything else. They talk about breast cancer and men being checked for prostate cancer, but we never have sexual health conversations, and we don't have these conversations because of the stigma attached to this particular arrangement. Sex is something that is just really taboo in the Black church, and we have to do the work to get that done. And as we see on this particular picture, the PrEP Squad, that's just a great, great media platform to get everyone encouraged and motivated about PrEP. I encourage all of us on the line to become the leaders and become the advocates as it relates to PrEP and introducing this topic to our community members. For those of us that work in this particular field, and I'm assuming that would be many of us on the line, I do want to applaud you in your work and in your with your efforts as it relates to spreading the word about PrEP, and continue to do that. And I encourage you to definitely more intentionally engage openly with your MSM population and allow that opportunity to create a wholesome environment, a holistic approach to get the client engaged, and not only get them engaged, but to help them become advocates as it relates to the PrEP program and the way that that particular program works. I will address, there was a thought that came up as it relates to the Black trans community and getting that information out to them as it relates to PrEP. PrEP is something that we do want to get to everyone, and we have to do the work to ensure that our entire community, and that's inclusive of our trans members. I'm excited about engaging with our trans members. I'm excited about bringing us together as a unit, because when we stand together as a unit, we can make a greater impact. And although this conversation has focused specifically on African American MSM, the reality of PrEP, the benefits of PrEP, takes a bigger scale outside of African Americans. I want everyone to, when we get off of this line, I want you to walk away feeling motivated and encouraged to get the message out as it relates to PrEP, and to have our communities come to a place where we can safely engage about the importance of having conversations regarding our sexual health. Sex is not something we should be ashamed of. Protecting ourselves definitely is not something we should be ashamed of. And sexual health conversations should not be limited or privileged to individuals because of race alone. We all have to do the work. We all have to have the conversation. And at the end of the day, we all must be accountable for one another. And that is my goal on today, is to bring some information to help you understand the realities and some of the challenges that African American MSM population faces and the thought processes that go through our heads even before we enter through the doors of a clinic. And when we look at social media, take an opportunity to learn how you can invest in disseminating information to the general public. And notice I said general public because it gets it to everyone. As relates to PrEP. We do ultimately want to get to a day where we no longer have to combat HIV or AIDS or worry about new HIV infections. And by being advocates, by using all of the technology, all of the resources, and most importantly, using our voice, is a great way to get this work done. So I'm excited and I'm thankful for your attention on today. I appreciate you all for the questions that you have brought to me. I hope that I have answered them in the most transparent way possible. And as one closing point that I do want to address before I get off, I think we have a moment, and it says, what are the works to get it done in talking about sex in the church? Sex in the church is a continual growing conversation, and I will use my own personal experience. At my particular church, as with most churches, it was very difficult to get my pastor to understand the buy-in of talking about sex. And when I say the buy-in of talking about sex, I'll give you an example, and some of you can probably agree with me. In the church in general, it's one thing when the Black female who's not married engages in sex, and as a result of her risk behavior, she becomes pregnant. That is highly celebrated. There's a baby shower, all the ladies at church come together and they celebrate her. But when the Black male comes up and says, well, hey, I finally, found this person and we're going to share our lives together, or I just met my boyfriend, here he is, no one celebrates that. No one wants to talk about that particular component. And ultimately, the gay side of it is put into a negative space versus the reality that if we're going to really be effective, we have to understand that everyone should be celebrated. So sex in the church is a continual work, and we have to start that engagement with the church leaders and make it transparent and relatable to that particular church. So I thank you guys for hearing me out on
David,
today. Yes.
David, I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah. We got some time, so if you want to stick with us just a little while longer.
Okay.
I do have I'm interjecting just because this question does bring up a point that we had another training earlier this year, and it's specifically for the African American population, and actually it's the involvement of the church, and then we actually had a person that had experience with she has an organization that she doesn't have one, but she mentioned different organizations, and as a response to that, at the AETC, so South Florida Southeast AETC, it's Education and Training Center, which is who we are presenting today. And David, I know you're presenting with us, but I just wanted to let everybody know that as a response to this, because we see this as an issue, actually one of our presenters, Sonia Boyne, she's a licensed mental health counselor here in Miami at the University of Miami. She has beginning to do having more the conversations with different pastors and different so leadership on the Christian and different denominations, because we have seen the great impact that and more when we talk about the African American population. So I know this topic in itself, and we might actually do it again if it's requested enough, because it's still something that there's so much to do. It's such a point. It's a gateway for people to come together, and at the same time, there's so much discrepancy, right? So I want to, everybody know that there's been work being done. And David, thank you, because that is such your powerful statement. That reaction. I myself, I'm a mental health counselor as well. I provide mental health therapy, and I've seen. We see, sometimes the stigma, many times the stigma, and that's something we have to. That's why we're here, right? We're here to educate everybody, and that includes lay persons in the sense of and pastors and church workers, because I don't know if you saw, David, there's many comments there on how African American males and males and females, transgender, just cisgender. The amount of people that do go to church, of their race in the church, there's a high percentage. So understanding that, that's very important for us to know. So thank you for sharing your view on that.
Yes, and
I have some questions, David, if you want to answer. I know we have some time, but if
yes.
Is it okay for me to kind of go through some of the ones that I'm going to pick? It's a lot of them, so I'm going to pick some.
There's one that I see here from Yuri, and it says, what are your suggestions to start the conversation within churches? One way I found to be effective, many churches have what we call church programs or bulletins, where the order of service is outlined and printed on this bulletin. Everyone that walks in the church gets one. And what I found to be effective, especially in the case where the pastor isn't 100% on board with having a presentation happen at the church, I just have them simply at the clinic's website and then the PrEP logo, and that way we're getting the message out via a particular platform, but indirectly. And utilizing those small resources can often empower that congregation member who may have been wondering about PrEP or may have some questions outside of outside of the PrEP component. They can simply go to that website, find out what resources are available, and ultimately we will get that church member in through our doors, because as we know, allowing and attaining opportunities in a church period is a very difficult process. So a way to start the conversation in the church is to simply start out with engaging via those bulletin programs and those announcements. While it's a nonverbal communication, it's a digital communication platform, and it does work.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that was a great question, for sure. There's some questions that says, as a white woman, what do you suggest for me says this, as a white woman, what do you suggest for me to earn the trust of my Black MSM patients?
Earning trust, that's a hard thing to answer directly. And the best way to gain the trust when engaging with clients across the board is to greet them in a manner that is comfortable, to where the client understands that you are here to help them. Allow the client to be involved in the conversation. And when we allow the client to be involved and empower them to share their thoughts, their processes, their concerns, it allows us to be more effective than we initially thought we could be to them. For example, I found in some conversations or counseling sessions with clients, I'll open up the dialogue and say, hey, how's your day going? How has the journey been for you since you've been on PrEP? And from there, they give you all of this information that I probably would have never gotten if I did not try to control the conversation. So one way I would say is to sort of pull back on leading the dialogue and allow the client to have a voice in the dialogue. And that's a great place to start with building the trust.
Yeah, thank you, David, for that. I think that's very important. And I think I'm just looking to see different questions that we've missed. And it's just questions like, what have you found to be the best way to engage Black MSM in PrEP?
A best way for me has been engaging the MSM community in spaces that are familiar and comfortable to them. For example, MSMs, as we know, typically don't visit gay bars as much as our other counterparts. So I have found it to be effective. We'll meet at the gym, have a session, maybe 5 or 10 minutes before we all work out, and then we move into our particular engagement at the gym for whatever reason. The biggest key to that is allowing and finding out a space that works for them, and it's a space where they will come and they're comfortable and they feel safe. In those moments, it's not always a clinical space to engage the African American community, but we have to think outside of the box. If we know they have a basketball tournament coming up next weekend at MLK Park, hey, invite them to meet you at the local the local park, and create a space where you all can set out, have a picnic, a couple of sodas, and just engage in a general space where everyone can be who they are. And I think that will definitely work with bringing our African American members into a space where they can have the conversation, be educated, and not feel as much stigma or fear when they're engaging about PrEP and any other topics that they may feel comfortable discussing.
I think, and David, as you spoke, I think a lot of it, understanding, so much, as I reflect as a participant and even as we're ending this webinar, just letting the education that you provided to us, because there's a lot of talks about how we do better. I think you mentioned the education and understanding so much of this, understanding what the Black MSM, African American men who have sex with men have gone through in the history. I think that in the history, so much for the healthcare, as you spoke in the beginning, I think that really contributes to and understanding that's where they're coming from. So knowing that you will have resistance, that's something that is going to be palpable, and it's for us. I think, David, and we speak about this motivation interview and meeting with the client where they're at, and I think with this approach would also help in many ways to really understand that, and normalize that, really normalize the resistance, right? What do you think, David, about that?
Right. When it comes to that particular piece, we do want to create an environment and an opportunity to allow the African American MSM to engage, because we realize there are already some fears and some concerns in place about the medical programs. Many times the client, their biggest fear is, can I afford it? How am I going to pay for it? Is it something that I have to come in continually for? And these questions are valid. For some individuals, including Black MSMs, it's really easy for them to walk into the door. And then we have the other spectrum. They're just consumed with all of the fear. They're consumed with all of the questions, the what ifs, and we need to be prepared to overcome those things and allow them to understand that their concerns are valid, but we're here to show them that we will do the work with them to ensure that this will be an experience that they can take the most from.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, David. I do. David, if you can go all the way to the beginning. First, I just want to thank you, David, just for the CE slides. If you, as you're doing that, for the C and CME slides, so I can tell. There's some people asking about that. Yeah, we can just leave it in the next first one. Just want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, David, for sharing this wonderful topic. I think there's so much to be said about this. I think we can't encompass it in one talk, so we might develop a series on this if people request, and I know people requesting about transgender issues, and we surely, there's so much to talk about. I think it will be unfair to kind of get all the topics in 1 hour. I think there'll be a disservice to the experience of the person. So I think it's very good that we have these questions, and as providers that we have the conversation starting, and the more we learn, the more we understand, the more we talk about, I think it's the best. We really will be able to reach more people. If you go to the first one, David, if you can, if you have control, the second one. Yeah, so okay. So I wanted to, everybody, I know we always have these questions about CEs and CMEs, and you will receive an email shortly as I'm gathering everybody. So this is the link that you're seeing here is the link for CEs. You will get a CE, so that includes basically everybody besides a doctor, a medical doctor. So who's not a medical doctor or DO would have to go to this link. Nurses, LMHCs, LCSWs, everybody that's not a MD or DO will have to complete this link for continuing education credits. So, and go to the next one, David, if you can. So this one is specifically for doctors, so a credit adjustment form in a PDF that is being emailed to you as well. It's emailed to everybody, but if you're not an MD or DO, please do not complete it, as it would not be relevant for you to receive the credit. It is important. Also in this email, you will get also the evaluation link. Without the evaluation being completed, we would not be able to grant you any Cs and CMEs, so please do that first. And yes, we have pharmacy credits, yes. And so please, and if you see on the email that was sent, registration, it says all the different panels that are included in this. In the first registration email, all the different panels that are included for CEs. So once again, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, David, once again for your expertise and your candor and everything that you've spoken. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.